Paris. A Tuesday afternoon, 1878. A girl sits on an iron bed in a lecture theatre at the Salpêtrière Hospital. She is 16 years old. Her name is Augustine. The room is full. Medical students line the front rows. Behind them, physicians from Berlin and Vienna. Behind them, artists and journalists and women in gloves who have come to watch. A man in a dark suit stands beside her, Jean-Martin Charcot, the most famous neurologist in France. He raises his hand, he snaps his fingers. Augustine begins to convulse. A photographer adjusts his camera. The audience leans forward. Someone takes notes. No one in this room questions what they are watching. They have a word for it. They call it hysteria. This is her case file. The word comes from hystera, Greek for uterus. It is one of the oldest medical diagnoses in the Western world, first recorded in Egyptian texts around 2000 BC. For over 2,000 years, physicians operated on a single assumption. The uterus could wander through a woman's body, pressing against organs, producing symptoms: fainting, convulsions, paralysis, anxiety, irritability. The list had no fixed boundary. Any complaint a physician could not otherwise explain could be classified as hysteria. By the mid-19th century, this had become routine. In 1859, a physician estimated that 1/4 of all women suffered from the condition. 1 in 4. Not an epidemic, not a rare disorder, but a standing definition of female existence. In 1881, the American neurologist George Beard attempted to catalogue the full range of hysteria's symptoms. The list ran to 75 pages. He declared it incomplete. 75 pages, no laboratory test, no agreed-upon cause. And any woman in the Western world could receive this diagnosis at any time from any doctor. Augustine Gleizes was born on August 21st, 1861. She spent her early childhood in the care of nurses. Later, she was placed in a religious boarding school where she was subjected to regular corporal punishment. Bourneville's clinical records contain 2 entries before her admission. The first, when she was 10, the second, at 13, naming her mother's lover. The nature of both entries is the same. Shortly after, she began experiencing seizures, partial paralysis, and episodes that her doctors could not explain. On October 21st, 1875, at the age of 14, she was admitted to the Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris. The Salpêtrière was not a small institution. It had been built in the 17th century as a poorhouse and had grown into a sprawling complex housing over 4,000 women. The elderly, the mentally ill, epileptics, and a growing category that the hospital classified as hysterics. Jean-Martin Charcot had taken charge of the hysteria ward in the 1860s. He had begun something no neurologist had attempted before: weekly public lectures in which patients were presented to audiences as living demonstrations of disease. Augustine was selected quickly. The clinical records, compiled by Charcot's assistant, Dr. Bourneville, describe her as tall, well-developed, with an agreeable physiognomy. A later note is more direct. The camera liked her. She was not yet 15. She had never menstruated. Every Tuesday, Charcot would bring Augustine before the audience. He would hypnotize her, a technique he believed was itself a clinical feature of hysteria, and she would enter a state he classified as grande hystérie, a term for a multi-stage seizure pattern he had documented and divided into phases. Her body would arch, her limbs would contort into positions Charcot labelled passionate attitudes. The audience would watch, the photographer would work. The images were published in the Iconographie photographique de la Salpêtrière, a multi-volume clinical archive distributed throughout European medical institutions. Augustine appeared more frequently than any other patient. Her photographs became the most widely reproduced images of hysteria in the history of medicine. The lectures drew not only students. Tourists visited, artists attended. Sigmund Freud sat in the audience. Critics described the Tuesday sessions as a peep show. Patients were sometimes bribed before their appearances to ensure cooperation. Across the Atlantic, a parallel case had already played out. In 1860, Elizabeth Packard, a 43-year-old mother of 6 in Jacksonville, Illinois, was committed to the state insane asylum by her husband, Theophilus. Her offense was disagreement. She had challenged his religious views. She had attended a different church. She had told him, in her own recorded words, that she had just as good a right to her opinion as her husband had to his. Theophilus warned her, "I should put you into the asylum." Elizabeth assumed this was impossible. A man could not commit his wife simply for holding a different opinion. She was wrong. Under Illinois law, a husband could commit his wife without any independent evidence of insanity. The request of the husband was sufficient. Elizabeth Packard spent 3 years inside the Jacksonville asylum. She was not mentally ill. Many of her fellow patients were not mentally ill either. The women around her had been committed for reading novels, for intellectual study, for requesting a divorce. One woman, diagnosed with extreme jealousy, was midway through a 16-year confinement. Back in Paris, Augustine's usefulness to Charcot depended entirely on her compliance. The lectures required her to perform. The photographs required her to hold still. And, for several years, she did. Then, she stopped. In the late 1870s, Augustine refused to be photographed any further. The clinical records do not explain why. What they record is the consequence. She was placed in solitary confinement, not for violence, not for self-harm, for refusing to perform the role the institution had assigned to her. Hysteria was not a disease. It was a diagnostic vacuum. It had no consistent clinical definition, no laboratory test, no tissue pathology, no agreed-upon mechanism. The word itself encoded its own assumption. Hystera, the uterus, embedding the premise that female biology was inherently pathological. The diagnosis persisted for 4,000 years because it served everyone except the patient. For physicians, it provided an answer when no answer existed. For families, it provided a respectable explanation for behavior that embarrassed them. For husbands, it provided a legal mechanism to remove wives who disagreed. For asylums, it provided a steady supply of patients. At the Salpêtrière, Charcot added a further dimension. He used hypnosis to induce symptoms in patients, then presented those induced symptoms as evidence of disease. The circularity was complete. Patients were hypnotized into performing hysteria, and their performances were cited as proof that hysteria existed. When patients stopped performing, they were punished, not cured. The scale of committal was not incidental, it was structural. In the United States, the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum recorded 125 reasons for admitting patients. Among the entries for women, laziness, rigorous study, novel reading, imaginary female trouble, and menopause. Asking for a divorce was grounds for committal. So was being in bad company. At the London Asylum in Ontario, the superintendent, Dr. R. Maurice Bucker, performed hysterectomies on women diagnosed with hysteria, operating on the theory that removing the reproductive organs would cure the mind. He was criticized by colleagues for what they called mutilation of helpless lunatics. He continued the procedures until his death in 1902. The diagnosis did not require evidence because the diagnosis was not designed to identify illness. It was designed to classify deviants, any woman who behaved outside the boundaries of expected femininity, who read, who argued, who desired, who refused, or who simply failed to be quiet, could receive it. The label did not describe what was wrong with the patient. It described what was wrong with the patient's behavior, as judged by the physician, the husband, the institution. George Beard's 75-page symptom list included a final entry that said more than the other 74 pages combined. A tendency to cause trouble for others. Elizabeth Packard was freed in 1863 after a jury trial that lasted 6 days. The verdict took 7 minutes. She was declared sane. She spent the rest of her life campaigning for reform. Her work led to changes in commitment laws across several states. Married women could no longer be institutionalized solely on a husband's word without independent medical examination. She published books. She lobbied legislatures. She died in 1897, having never stopped. Augustine Gleizes did not campaign. She did not write books. She escaped. In 1880, at the age of 18 or 19, she disguised herself in men's clothes and walked out of the Salpêtrière Hospital. No one stopped her. She was never found. No confirmed record of her life after the escape exists. Charcot died in 1893. His Hysteria work was gradually discredited. His colleague, Hippolyte Bernheim, had argued for years that the Salpêtrière's demonstrations were products of suggestion, that Charcot had not discovered a disease, but had created a performance. The American Psychiatric Association removed hysteria from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual in 1952. The related term, hysterical neurosis, was formally deleted from the DSM-3 in 1980. No physician was prosecuted. No institution was investigated for wrongful committal. 15 medical conditions still carry Charcot's name. Augustine Gleizes has no memorial. The only way Augustine found out of a diagnosis built on being female was to stop appearing as one. One question for the comments. What would it take today for a diagnosis to go unquestioned for 4,000 years? The next case on this channel, a surgeon in London performed an amputation in 300 seconds. The patient died, his assistant died, a spectator died. 3 deaths from one operation. This is the sealed ward.